Welcome to Goldfish on Games Cheat Sheet, your primer to getting to know the Amiga 500, which started life as a way of producing a cheaper Amiga 1000, a development that wasn't actually welcomed by the original Amiga team, but the machine went on to become the most popular of the Amiga line, with estimates putting it at 6 million units sold during its production run between 1987 and 1991. The Rock Lobster motherboard contained the following: a Motorola 68000 CPU running at roughly 7 MHz, and due to falling prices was able to push the RAM up to a full 512 KB. And it still contained 3 custom chips that made the Amiga what it was. These included the Denise, which provided the graphics hardware. This included having a system colour palette of 4096 colours, of which it could typically draw 32 colours to screen using a mixture of a planar frame buffer and 8 hardware sprites. But it also had a special mode known as Ham that could draw all colours to the screen, though due to limitations it was rarely used in gaming. This was paired with the Paula chip, which produced 4 channels of 8-bit sampled sound, and to provide stereo, 2 channels were always left and 2 channels were always right. But the volume and pitch of each of those channels were under the developer's control. Due to how the channels were laid out, it was rare for a game to have both music and sound effects at the same time. And finally we have Agnes. She was in charge, and gave each of the chips their access to the system RAM, but also contained 2 extra features: the Blitter, which allowed for very fast writing to the frame buffer, and the Copper code processor, which allowed for running code while the screen was being drawn. This was the common way of trying to break out of the colour limitations, and allowed for the famous raster bars. It was also decided to move the kickstart into ROM, to allow the machine to be far more user-friendly and to boot much faster, as it wasn't having to load from disk, but it did mean that it was much harder to upgrade the firmware. The machine had quite a number of options for user input, but the 3 most common ones were the built-in keyboard, which had a full set of standard keys plus 3 that were specific to the Amiga. 2 of them had a stylized A on them, 1 full and 1 empty, though in the earliest models one of those was actually in a Commodore logo, which gave the machine its nickname, the Chicken Lips. The 3rd one was a help key. Round the back of the machine we can find 2 9-pin D-sub connectors that allowed for a 2-button mouse, which was provided with each Amiga, and a 2-button joystick, though because this was backwards compatible with the C64 and thus the old Atari format, it was far more likely to get a joystick that was wired up to be 1 button only, and thus many games were only targeted to a single button, which gave rise to the infamous up to jump. Though as most users had a joystick rather than a pad, this was less of an issue than you might have thought. The A500 had a built-in double-sided double-density floppy drive, which when coupled with the custom sectoring managed to store 880 KB of data. This was up from the typical 720 KB that those discs would normally store. But even with all that space, many games came on multiple discs, with the largest one requiring 16 floppies in total. So it wasn't uncommon to have to change disc midway through a game, or even midway through loading a level. The games came in various different box sizes and styles, but typically the larger the box, the more expensive the game. The dimensions could vary quite wildly between various different publishers, but the budget releases tended to stick to the smaller style box that only required a couple of discs and a small manual. As the platform didn't have anything built in to protect games from being copied, developers got creative. Some used non-standard disc formats, or even damaging the disc in a very specific way to stop the built-in disc copy from being able to do its job, but a lot of these were worked around by specific applications like Xcopy. Other devs just asked nicely not to copy the game, reminding you that it was actually illegal to do so. But the most common form of copy protection was the off-disk kind. These ranged from complex codebooks, pages that couldn't easily be photocopied, to requiring the right word out of a very large manual, and there was always the really fun code wheels. Being able to upgrade the machine was high on the priority list of the original Amiga development team, and this carried over to the Amiga 500. It had the trapdoor underneath the machine which allowed for adding more RAM or even a real-time clock. But the side slot was the real star of the show. It had direct access to the buses of the machine and allowed for an impressive range of upgrades. These included hard drives, RAM, and even CPUs. Amazingly, it also allowed for the creation of an action replay card, which could freeze the game and apply cheats. And around the back we had ports for printers, serial devices like modems, and external floppy drives for when you got fed up of switching discs. And to round out this video, let's take a look at some of the games, as it had quite the range of titles and genres, with developers continuing to target the hardware long after a Commodore discontinued it, though many later games required some form of RAM upgrade. Here are a few games I think played best on the Amiga: Exile, Lemmings, K240, Cannon Fodder, Rough and Tumble, and Xenon 2. I feel these show off the hardware in various ways, and hopefully gives you an idea of what you can expect from the machine. So until next time, this was the Goldfish on Games cheat sheet for the Commodore Amiga 500.